What if US President Donald Trump makes the ultimate decision? Having tried everything that he can think of with Iran, from negotiating via mediators to airstrikes and strong-arming, Trump decides that enough is enough. If the US is going to win in Iran, it can't do it using strikes and Strait of Hormuz blockades alone. Boots have to be put on the ground. A total invasion is needed. It's the unthinkable, but it may have to happen. And if it does, this is one of the scenarios that Trump may try to follow. One thing is for sure, Iran would never be the same again. Trump doesn't want to invade Iran. He knows the very idea is unpopular. But he has tried everything he can think of. A $300 billion reconstruction plan that was supposed to bring Iran back to negotiations failed to get off the ground after questions were asked about where the money would come from. America has done plenty of damage to Iran with the combined aerial and naval strategy that we've seen throughout Operation Epic Fury, but it hasn't been enough. That strategy assumed that Iran would try to fight the US toe-to-toe. That's not what happened. America has the superior firepower in terms of pure destructive force, but Iran has an asymmetric strategy combined with a willingness on the part of the regime and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, to hunker down and absorb whatever America throws. Drones have become a factor. As powerful as the US is at high altitudes and in naval battles, it has struggled to contend with Iran's low-altitude threats. A 5-week campaign has now dragged on for almost half a year. Finding himself running out of options, Trump has to choose the best from a bad bunch. He can't capitulate. Doing so would show too much weakness, as it would mean the US has to walk away from a fight it started with nothing to show for its efforts. Operation Epic Fury would be for nothing if Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz and continues to enrich uranium. But diplomacy, barricades, and bomb after bomb haven't taken the US to where Trump wants it to be in Iran. There is only one option left, the least terrible of the terrible choices: invasion. The scenario we're about to present for that invasion relies on one crucial factor: Iran's Kurds would be in play. The US needs that, and as we've learned, it wanted to encourage the Kurds to carry out the bulk of the work from the start. There is no shortage of ethnic groups inside Iran that want to see the end to the country's regime. Most of the minorities in the country, including the Kurds, who make up 10% of Iran's population, the Azerbaijanis, who make up 16%, and the Lurs, Baluchis, Turkic, and Arabic people, who all have populations in the single-digit percentages, want to see change. Minorities are persecuted by Iran's regime. However, gathering these disparate people into a united front isn't an option for the US. They all have different ideas of what Iran, without its current regime, should look like, and most don't have the sort of fighting force that will be a true help during an invasion. The Kurds are the most likely option to help the US, and America clearly identified that itself, long before the prospect of this invasion came about. In a March 4th report, CNN revealed sources had told it that the CIA was working to arm Kurdish forces in Iran, and had begun doing so several months before Operation Epic Fury began. The idea seemed to be that the Kurds would storm Tehran, supported by US and Israeli air power, to topple the regime during the first few weeks of Operation Epic Fury. This initial plan was bolstered by 5 Kurdish groups in Iran coming together under one banner as the Coalition of Political Forces of Iranian Kurdistan on February 22nd, just 6 days ahead of the first airstrikes. Together, those groups bring tens of thousands of fighters into the mix. Those groups could link up with former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and together they would take over for a regime in the process of being crippled. The US thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The storming of Tehran by the Kurds never happened. So Plan B then. As the US prepares for its own invasion, it still wants to involve the Kurds, especially as they could prove to be a very disruptive force in Iran's north. America knows now that the Kurds alone aren't enough to get the job done, even with support from airstrikes. So they will be an asset rather than the main event player. It's the US that will have to do the bulk of the work. It's in these early planning days when the first barrier to the US invasion appears. That barrier is Turkey. And the last thing that Turkey wants to see is well-armed groups of Kurdish militants, even if they're working alongside an ally like the US. In fact, it seems to be Turkey that played a key role in blocking Kurdish groups from getting involved during the initial stages of Operation Epic Fury. That's according to Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who said in July, Turkey played a very effective role in this process. They held talks with the Americans and took a very firm position on the issue. These collective efforts ensured the failure of the plot to divide Iran and stir internal unrest. So how does the US overcome this barrier? It doesn't involve the Kurds. Israel does. Israel likely has no interest in getting involved in a ground operation. Trump knows that. However, he also knows that Israel's Mossad was behind the initial plan to get the Kurds involved in the fighting, and it may be willing to bite the bullet and claim that Israel is behind what the Kurds do in the US invasion. That would save the US from a diplomatic crisis with Turkey. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was a proponent of the original idea, and he may be willing to support the Kurds with Israeli air power while the US puts boots on the ground. If that's the case, then the role of the Kurdish fighters won't be to storm Tehran. Not for a while, at least. They would be in place to cause chaos in Iran's northern and western regions. We've already seen hints of this happening in June. A spate of Kurdish attacks left 4 members of the IRGC dead, and there is speculation that it was the Kurds who were behind the supposed car crash that claimed the life of the political deputy of the IRGC's navy, Mohammad Akbarzadeh. Trump has the plan in place, assuming the Kurds are in play with the help of Israel, and he can either smooth over or simply not care about the trouble that part of the plan causes with Turkey. Trump and his administration can focus on the US role. And it's here that things get complicated. There are obvious targets for the US to focus on during its ground invasion. Those targets aren't without their complications. The islands in the Strait of Hormuz will dictate everything, and we're about to explain why. But before we do, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're enjoying this video, we have plenty more on the channel and release videos daily. Subscribe and ring the notification bell to make sure you see them. America's role, at least initially, is to storm the islands in the Strait of Hormuz. But not all of the islands. There are 8 to choose from, but some are more strategically important than others. The US settles on 3: Karg, Larak, and Qashem. All 3 can be used to hurt Iran's regime in different ways. When it comes to oil, which is the lifeblood of the entire Iranian economy, Karg Island means everything to Iran's regime. Lying about 26 kilometers from the Iranian coast, keep that in mind because it'll be important, this island has already been hit by a heavy dose of US air power. There was a reason for that. Karg Island is where the oil infrastructure is located. Specifically, it's home to an export terminal that processes about 90% of Iran's oil shipments, amounting to a capacity to load about 7 million barrels of oil daily. This one island is responsible for tens of billions of dollars flowing into Iran every year. Taking control of it would allow the US to slice the economic jugular that keeps Iran alive. At least that would be the plan. Larak Island plays a different, though no less important role. This island essentially serves as Iran's eyes and ears in the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has blockaded to put pressure on the US to end its war. Located to the east of Qashem and relatively well fortified with networks of bunkers and small ports filled with attack craft, it's this island that effectively became the booth where merchant ships paid the $2 million toll that Iran demanded for safe passage through Hormuz during the height of Operation Epic Fury. The island is also loaded with radar systems, communications towers, and IRGC observation posts, all of which the US will want to take out of commission. Then there's Qashem, the fortress of the 3. Though a beautiful island on the surface, Qashem is large, measuring 1,445 square kilometers. It has 148,000 residents, and it's believed to be home to an underground missile city. It's also just 22 kilometers away from Bandar Abbas, which is home to one of Iran's main naval bases. Iranian fast boats constantly launch from this island, as do drones and missiles, making it the attacking force that helps Iran keep the Strait of Hormuz under control. Some have even nicknamed the island Iran's unsinkable aircraft carrier, and it would be easily the most challenging of the 3 for the US to invade. But invade the US must. If the US is to destroy Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, which would be a key goal of putting boots on the ground, then Qashem must fall. The 3 islands together would deliver a 3-punch combo to the Iranian regime. Karg delivers an economic haymaker, Larak sends a right hook into Iran's eyes, and Qashem takes out the guts of Iran's offensive potential. But only in the Strait of Hormuz, and it's here where we see another problem arise. We won't say that it's easy for the US to take these 3 islands. Doable is the better word, assuming America could amass a force of several tens of thousands of soldiers and actually get them to the islands, which is no small feat in itself. But fast forward to a US occupation, and it may soon become evident that the US has sailed, or flown, into a trap of Iran's making. It's one thing to take these islands. Holding them is a whole other problem. You may remember that we asked you to keep Karg Island's proximity to the Iranian coast in mind a little earlier. There's a reason for that. 26 kilometers isn't very far for a missile or drone to fly. And now you see the American problem. Stationed on these 3 islands, the US troops would be sitting ducks for an entire arsenal of Iranian firepower that can be launched from coastal regions. Artillery and small boat swarms would also likely come into play, leaving the US with the extremely difficult task of setting up air defenses and trying to create logistical through lines to these islands, all as they are being bombarded. On top of these immediate problems, the US would have a propaganda challenge on its hands. Iranian reconnaissance drones would be filming everything. Imagine if one of those drones happened to catch American soldiers being hit, be it by missiles, Shahed strike drones, or artillery, the latter of which becomes a factor for the first time now that soldiers are so close to the mainland. That footage will be circulated all over Iranian state television. At the same time, Iran will be able to position the US as an invader, perhaps whipping up support from Gulf and Middle Eastern nations. Sure, the US might be able to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is a throughway for 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas supplies, but at what cost? Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of American soldiers' lives could be lost if the US only invades these 3 islands. More will be needed. At the very least, the US would have to combine the invasion of this trio of islands with putting boots on the ground in the coastal areas that represent the greatest threat to troops installed on Karg, Larak, and Qashem. Trump and his advisors would know this already. They would have to be blind to assume that Iran wouldn't strike as soon as the trio of Hormuz Islands was under US control. So the US would have to try to get ahead of the problem. Activating the Kurdish forces in Iran's north and west helps, as they can distract the IRGC and Iran's military, forcing a fight on 2 fronts. But the coast still has to be taken care of. In for a penny, in for a pound, as the British idiom goes. Trump and the US would have no choice, and it's here where the numbers related to the invasion really start to add up. For a start, Iran's coastline is massive, about 1,800 kilometers stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. That presents a challenge in its own right. Traditional amphibious assaults are going to be difficult to pull off, especially as the IRGC will likely deploy fast boats and drones into Hormuz. Those assets will be trying to disrupt logistics, but they are certain to go after any landing ships heading toward coastal bases. The US has already sent the USS Boxer and USS Tripoli to the Persian Gulf during Operation Epic Fury, but actually getting either through Hormuz and to bases like Bandar Abbas would be incredibly difficult. An aerial invasion, or at least a combination of air power and amphibious landing ships, could be a solution. The US would already be peppering missile, boat, and drone launch sites across the coast, taking advantage of having destroyed about 80% of Iran's air defense network. The US would have to deploy the likes of C-5 Galaxy, C-17 Globemaster III, and C-130 Hercules to get troops and equipment into Iran, though the question of how is difficult. Iran still has mobile air defenses, and those massive airplanes need places to land. Using Qashem as a landing pad and then sending troops and equipment into Iran by ship from there could be an option, though one that doesn't overcome the challenges that impact simply using ships in the strait. Perhaps airstrikes on airstrips near the coast to clear the way, followed by landing cargo aircraft, deplaning, and then immediately moving on to assaults conducted by soldiers, perhaps. The deployment of special forces teams from helicopters could also help with this approach. Then there are the numbers. Taking the islands may only require several tens of thousands of soldiers. A full-blown invasion of Iran could easily require 1 million or more. That's for a full invasion that involves storming all of Iran, right up to and including pushing to Tehran to take out the country's regime. The US likely won't want to do that. Trump certainly won't. He's already been forced to go from once railing against other presidents for their Middle Eastern policies to starting his own Gulf War. He might just be able to get away with putting boots on the ground, but committing 1 million troops to Iran would be a step too far. Attacking the islands and coastal regions to enable a strategy of economic attrition would be the preferred plan. For that, estimates vary on how many soldiers would be needed. Those estimates range from the tens to the hundreds of thousands. Taking Bandar Abbas alone might require a force of close to 20,000. And when you take the 1,800-kilometer coastline into account, it's easy to see why hundreds of thousands more might be needed. But let's assume that the US commits to this plan. There's still a little issue of Iran's regime to consider. Having already proven itself asymmetrically, which is why an invasion is needed in the first place, that regime will be able to employ more of its traditional military might against a US force that is now within range of strikes. That much is a given. The regime also said in early July that it's ready for war if the US fails to commit to a deal, telling us that the regime is willing to bed in and fight if the time comes. There are also interesting claims being made about how Iran would respond if the US did invade. In mid-July, a member of Iran's National Security Committee, Ahmad Bakhshayesh Ardestani, said, "If the United States puts boots on the ground in Iran, we may also launch ground attacks on Kuwait and Bahrain." That brings a whole new element of danger to the invasion plan. Those nations don't want to fight a war with Iran. They didn't want Operation Epic Fury in the first place. If Iran followed through on this threat, they would be put in the position of choosing between US allies and Iranian pressure. If the latter wins, both will be pushing the US hard to drop its invasion. The same could be said of other Gulf nations such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia, once they see how far Iran is willing to go. It's not as though Iran doesn't have the manpower for a response like this either. Global Firepower reports that Iran has 610,000 active soldiers in its military, a further 220,000 in paramilitary forces, mostly the IRGC, and 350,000 reserves. Causing chaos would be Iran's goal, enough of it to pressure the US into reversing course. Now the big question, could this actually happen? Trump is reported to be considering all of America's options up to and including an invasion. That's according to a July 15th CNN report which claims that sources close to the White House have revealed that Trump has received options for expanding operations in Iran. Trump has also promised more airstrikes in an attempt to pressure Iran into submission. There's a feeling that what failed before isn't going to work at the second time of asking. Plus, at the time of creating this video, America's midterm elections are coming. They're a few months away, with November being the big month, but they are coming. And if the US invades now, that would give Trump a 4-month deadline to either win big or get stuck in a quagmire that could ruin the Republican Party's chances of keeping hold of both houses of Congress. That political aspect has to be considered, as handing the houses over to the Democrats would mean far greater opposition posed to Trump domestically. Still, something has to be done. And right now, it looks like Trump's options are a humiliating retreat or an escalation. If he chooses the latter, what we've just presented is one possible scenario. There are other, more limited options. We covered one of those, focusing on Karg Island a few months ago. If you want to find out more, along with getting more insight into why this island is so important, then check that video out. And if you found this analysis of the US putting boots on the ground in Iran interesting, remember to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss what we have coming next. And thank you for watching.